What career seems to attract an unlikely amount of idiots, despite of being intellectually demanding? My significant other is a choir teacher, and this year our music department received a lot of funding from a donation. The music department made a list of things they need. The school admins completely ignored their list and bought a ton of new music stands and smart boards for the band and choir rooms. Now they still don't have the equipment they need, but they have so many music stands they had to put all of their old stands in storage. Edit. I'm 100% this is just incompetence or arrogance. I imagine the admins think they know better than a couple of teachers. So much this. I was furious when I read articles about people who in the will gave money to their old school for a library, but since it was not a binding contract, they basically said fuck the nerds and used the money for football bullshit. The great trick is to reduce the library budget by the amount of the gift and shunt that budget money to something useless. That's how they get around binding contracts. I wouldn't be surprised this is just incompetence, but also wouldn't rule out possible fraud. It's possible the administrator found a great deal and bought all this unnecessary equipment and pocketed the difference, or they know someone who sells school equipment and is doing them a favor in exchange for a cut. I'm about 85% sure my boss is doing this as well. He is the director of the HVAC dept. I am the shop number 2 and shop steward. Basically his right-hand guy. I also run the controls dept within the HVAC department. We sub out a lot of installs because we don't have the manpower. There is this one company we used who was excellent. But my boss kicked them out because one job took 3 extra days to finish, and one employee of the contractor showed up high to his school for work. The company's install manager fired him that day and the company formally apologized but was kicked out anyways. The company who took their spot fucks up left and right. I am talking every single job. Super sloppy, compressors blow up after 5 days from units being massively overcharged, marking jobs done that they never did. Just egregious. He actively defends them and uses them for stuff even us union shop guys could do. They charge 3 to 4 times more than previous company for the same scope of work. I firmly believe he is getting kickbacks. Our district's high school admin decided the best way to help low-income students was to put them all on academic disciplinary probation. They can't see how discriminatory this is, especially in a small school where half the students qualify for free lunch. So, if your student doesn't qualify for free lunch, they don't receive probation. If they're failing classes or skipping school, etc., they get a pat and a do better, but the low-income students can't get off probation no matter their grades or attendance. Okay, former Title I public school teacher here, will be real, didn't even make it a year, and it was because of this bullshit that I didn't want to be complicit in. Let me explain. Lots of states have some kind of tracking for underperforming students. This is usually determined by state tests, but can also be determined by a school district for the purposes of receiving different sources of funding. Students who get labeled as underperforming in a Title I district means that if they perform above expectations, you get extra financial bonuses. There's also a payment per student from the state and our federal government for Title I schools. I remember sitting in a PD where the admin was only half joking about just making sure all the kids bombed at the beginning of year district assessments so that when they showed growth at the end of the year, we'd get more funding. This also meant that teachers got bigger stipends, anywhere from $3K $32K a year. I was so disgusted that this was encouraged, while not making enough base salary from the district itself, by the way, that it's actually one of the reasons I quit. I've been working in special education for about a decade now, and I've found that it unfortunately attracts a lot of complete idiots. Schools are usually so desperate for support staff they'll pretty much hire anyway. Shit, I think the first district I worked for lucked out with me, as being at the very least average, and based on my track record over the last decade, but the head of special education reached out to me after finding my job post on Craigslist. Back when you put position wanted ads in newspapers, I got a phone call from the school in the little town near me saying they had an opening for a teacher. Forget that I didn't have a degree, had no teaching experience, didn't major in the subject, and didn't want to be a teacher. They had a position open, in a class with no teacher. It's a scramble every year of teachers jumping ship from one school to another, and hiring new teachers who shouldn't even be in the field. If you don't work for a major school district in a region, congrats, you get to take anyone who applies and can meet minimally acceptable standards. My dad worked as a teacher and then administrator an hour or so out of town, and everyone here is associated with one of the schools or can't afford to move districts, and holy fuck, the teachers he had to hire. And in some cases, couldn't get rid of, because small community school boards are, nepotistic, to put it lightly. The largest school district in this city has, this was 8 years ago when I last got an update, a waitlist of 60,000 teaching applicants. Districts an hour south were begging people who had even an emergency teaching certificate, because they had vacant positions and needed warm bodies. I feel really seen right now. I'm a newer attorney and I'm not the best at arguing, but I do try super hard to settle, which many people are not interested in. Like they'll throw out a single idea and if I disagree with it then it's like 0-60. We are going to trial. Mediation is a waste of time. Also, anytime I see opposing counsel's bar starts with a 0, 1, or 2, I involuntarily clench my butt cheeks in anticipation of the fruitless conversation that is more than likely to ensue. I don't know if I have the patience for this profession and the obstinate, single-minded idiocy that goes on a daily basis. Finance really runs the gamut from super bright to dumb as a hammer. Finance is confusing on purpose, lots of acronyms, lots of numbers, and requires salespeople. That's a potent recipe for sneaking dummies into an intellectually demanding profession. I used to work at a financial firm helping financial advisors manage their clients' accounts, and oh my god, some of them should not be allowed to handle other people's finances. There was one advisor who wanted to apply to trade options on some accounts even though he didn't even know the basics of options, and no matter how many times it was explained to him he just didn't understand. He wanted to apply for the highest level of options that could seriously screw up someone's finances if done improperly. We did not approve him. Another advisor couldn't figure out how to print a form from our website. He called us for help, insisting it was a problem on our end. Turns out he didn't have the printer plugged in, and then it didn't even have ink. We asked him after exhausting all other options because we gave him the benefit of the doubt that he would have already checked. Another advisor, while super nice, couldn't figure out how to attach a file to an email, and I had to walk him through creating bookmarks to important pages on our site. I'm sure back in the day he may have been great, but in this day and age where so much is done online and paper forms and documents are so much more susceptible to fraud, you just can't be computer illiterate. Another advisor kept getting mad at us even though he kept bringing in the client into his office, filling out the form wrong and having them sign it, and then sending it to us in a state we could not accept it. He was told several times what options on the form needed to be selected to do what they wanted, and instead of realizing he was doing something wrong he just went off on us. But like, without the client's signature on a proper form we legally couldn't do what he wanted. LOL, basic reading comprehension would have solved his problem. The financial industry also creates new words and acronyms in order to increase the perceived complexity, which we can then justify fees because the consumer surely cannot do what we do. Sarcasm. I'm also jaded because I'm just tired of the financial industry and working an incredible amount of hours, and probably will quit and move into an easier profession and make 1/2 of what I do now. When I went into labor, the first nurse I had to deal with was awful. She didn't believe my water broke, as I have a puddle of fluid flowing out of me. Then when she went to check to see how dilated I was, she couldn't locate my cervix and got super mad at me for it. It's not like I'm playing a prank and hid my cervix from you. Both my sister and mom are nurses. Both describe it as toxic. My mom was a healthcare assistant and used to get bullied by nurses at the hospital she worked at. The thought of my 55-year-old mom being bullied by 30- and 40-year-olds because of her weight used to really upset me. She moved to a different hospital closer to where they live. She loves it there. Due to the insecurities about her weight, she started cycling for fitness. 7 years later, she recently cycled 66 kilometers along the coast of Ireland. Everybody is proud of her. My ex of 6 years went through nursing school and started her career while we were together, and my god did it change my opinion of nurses. Her peers were about 40% decent people trying to help others and 60% the absolute worst control freaks and narcissists I've ever seen in a professional setting. And that same portion acted like they were doctors with some vast medical knowledge. So when there are a herd of crazy nurses turning anti-vax, I'm not surprised in the least. Seeing the curriculum firsthand, nurses don't really learn a whole lot of medicine. They're much more about safety, process, and how to respond to situations with a tiny bit of pharmacology mixed in. So anytime a nurse starts making strong medical claims, I tend to get suspicious. One time during a night out, a girl collapsed from being too drunk or high or something. She was breathing and had a pulse, but was unresponsive. My friends and I were like 10 feet away, so we turned her on her side and called 911. Some girl comes screaming at us that we need to be doing CPR. We told her that the unconscious girl was breathing and had a pulse. You're not supposed to do CPR unless their heart stops. The screaming girl then started screaming even louder, "I'm a nurse, I know better than some assholes," and tried to fight through us to give a necessary CPR to the poor girl. She even tried to correct the paramedics when they arrived. Some nurses really think they're God's gift to medicine. I work people with HIV/AIDS, and I also volunteer as a HIV friend, so if someone is too afraid to get tested or hear the results or tell the family or literally whatever, I go there and just be there for them and let them know how loved and valued they are, and they will never be alone, and we will not gonna let them die. However, some nurses really makes my job difficult because of the amount of stupidity, ignorance, miseducation, stupidity, worth mentioning twice, racism, homophobia I see at work every day, really makes her life hell as well. Hard to believe people like that can actually work in nursing. I worked at a place that offered Kaiser. One of their urgent care units was run by a crazy nurse. Once she was rinsing my ear due to impacted wax, but didn't purge the air out of the cylinder with each fill, so when it got to the air, the result was painfully loud. I pointed it out to her, and without a word she did the same thing again. Another time I had gone in due to a rash around a wound that was worsening. They told me to just put Neosporin on it. I went back a few days later because it was still getting worse. The nurse came in mid-exam, looked at it, and says in an accusing tone, "Are you putting Neosporin on it?" "Yes, as instruct, you need to stop putting Neosporin on it cause you're probably allergic." She flounced out of the exam room, leaving myself and the nurse going WTF. Went and paid cash for a private practice doctor, who correctly diagnosed a secondary shingles infection at the wound site. I was early 30s at the time, when filling the RX. I'll never forget the way the cute friendly farm technician's demeanor changed like a switch when she saw my script for acyclovir, which I later realized is commonly used by genital herpes patients. Still covered by Kaiser, I went to the urgent care again some months later, which was so large it was split into 2 semi-autonomous units. The receptionist asked if I wanted to go to DR so-and-so site or Nurse Ratchet, to which I blurted out no. The receptionist's expression told me this was common. The boss paying for Kaiser had a heart attack and was in the hospital for a few days. He said the nurses greeted him the first morning with, "We didn't think you were going to make it through the night." I got the distinct impression they reached the point in his blood thinner maintenance where they decided he was too expensive. Long story short, he ended up with a stroke, which I correctly diagnosed over the phone when I found his smashed car at the shop one weekend and called his house. The staff at Kaiser collectively took like 3 inpatient days to conclude the same. May get heat for this one, but what can I say? I speak from real-life experiences. Years of it. Folks in the military. For the members of the public who have never served, many view soldiers as these great, brave defenders of freedom. In reality, there is an unlikely amount who could not spell brave, defenders, freedom, or even of. There's a group referred to as VAB waivers. The ASVAB is a test people take before joining the military. The most basic of an IQ test. The max score is 99. A score of 31 is all it takes to join the army. But there are waivers for people who can't even get 31. And people get those, especially during wartime. Yet these same people are able to follow war strategies and complete missions. Unreal if you think about it. I took some business classes when I was in engineering school. Figured it would come in handy. Boy, was that an eye-opener. You'd be working alongside people who couldn't understand the basic algebraic equations that tell you profit, loss, or cost of goods sold and so forth. Math just wasn't their thing. And you'd want to take them by the shoulders and shake them awake, like, "Hey dumbass, money is a numbers game. If you want to be good with money, you better get good with numbers." No clue. Can't understand a simple equation, and they're gonna hope Excel will bail them out when the time comes. But they suck at Excel too. Step 1, meetings. Step 3, get rich. Just amazingly dumb people. Yeah, I've seen this firsthand. I knew some people who wanted to go to that school in Seattle. Can't remember the name of it, but it basically feeds into Nintendo. A bunch of them were shocked that the application required them to do literally 1,000 plus drawings. The only guy that made it was the one who was ready to do those drawings and just did it with no complaint. Shocking, but game development is a lot of work. That's an easy one. Lots of gamers go on to school to become game devs, but lots of gamers are entitled idiots. It's the same problem with new restaurant owners. People spend their entire lives going to restaurants as the customers and always experience the relaxed, stress-free atmosphere that comes with being served food, but never see the extreme level of labor and stress that goes into actually running a restaurant. Gamers always play games but will never ever understand the insane level of complexity of AAA games development, the dozens of departments all communicating, so goodbye all those antisocial Redditer types, the breakneck deadlines, the labor-intensive debugging, the monumental scale of making a game from scratch if it's a new IP. With the way gamers talk about game devs, you think half this shit just pops in out of thin air. And then gamers have the gall to act like adding new content to a game is a simple task and that devs are just lazy or incompetent. I've seen some insane expectations over the decade I've been in online communities. Simple stuff like thinking making a new character skin only takes a few hours of work because it's just art. Sorry for the rant, but gamers frustrate the shit out of me. Gamers always play games but will never ever understand the insane level of complexity of AAA games development, the dozens of departments all communicating, so goodbye all those antisocial Redditer types, the breakneck deadlines, the labor-intensive debugging, the monumental scale of making a game from scratch if it's a new IP. With the way gamers talk about game devs, you think half this stuff just pops in out of thin air. And then gamers have the gall to act like adding new content to a game is a simple task and that devs are just lazy or incompetent. I've seen some insane expectations over the decade I've been in online communities. Simple stuff like thinking making a new character skin only takes a few hours of work because it's just art. Sorry for the rant, but gamers frustrates me. You fool, I've made a platformer in Scratch, as if it's not obvious. If you are someone who wants to be a game designer, consider trying to be a dungeon master and run a mini campaign with your friends, just to see. You'll realize quickly that making a story, quests, NPCs, a world, factions, environments, loot, monsters, a main bad guy, etc., any one of these things is really hard to do well on their own. And being a DM is just for your buddies who come over to play some D&D. Imagine doing that, but your audience is now any gamer who might be interested. Of course, you would specialize in one role, maybe dabble in others, if you try to join a big company. But it's a fine exercise nonetheless, as it exposes you to a ton of different roles. 100% lawyers. I've probably met more dumb lawyers than smart ones. Tons of lawyers have a Rain Man level of savant knowledge about one narrow area and cannot wipe their own ass with instructions. But more common are lawyers who are just barely competent enough to keep their license, shuffling along doing the bare minimum, totally useless in court, never respond emails, etc. We are a book smart but common sense and social skills dumb profession. If I ever managed to get my side gigs more successful, I'd happily leave. I stay in this career because I make a healthy salary with employer retirement contributions for basically high-level proofreading and improv skills. As an attorney, I came here to say this. I can definitely confirm a lot of us are special types of stupid. When I say special types of stupid, tons of us had the cognitive ability to survive law school and the bar exam but willingly fall into semi-functional alcoholism, drug abuse. Even at a super conservative Christian law school, you could literally watch the transition from occasional partier to alcoholic over the course of 3 years. Work hard, play harder mentality is real, but the play part is always alcohol and or cocaine. Total inability to manage money is more common than you'd think. Complete lack of self-awareness. These attorneys are generally assholes. No common sense. We tend to call these the true believers. Almost unanimously, the smartest attorneys I have met are totally lacking in the social skills department. These are the people who draft 100-page merger agreements but cannot hold a conversation about literally anything other than mergers. Edit. And I am not trying to say people who fall into drug addiction are not smart. It is an addiction, therefore it defies logic and supersedes intelligence. I am just saying these super intelligent people aren't able to recognize patterns in their own behavior when the pattern is work, get hammered, and repeat. I had something similar happen. Back when I was at uni, we had a class where the teacher was an older man named Ray. If anyone had missed a single lesson during the term, he would dock half your grade. So the highest you could get was 50%. He told us this in the first class, but we all laughed and thought he was joking. You needed 40% to pass the class at the lowest grade. So when everyone got their grades back after the final assignment, about 90% of the class, including me, failed. Shit hit the fan and everyone complained about him. The assignments were regraded and the teacher was fired a few days later. Turns out he had worked there for many years and had pulled similar shit like this for years, but only this year he introduced a much larger penalty than he ever did before. Apparently before he would do shit like dock 5 or 10% here or there on assignments for minor stuff like spelling mistakes, wrong reference style, or arriving late to classes. This grumpy man looked to be in his 60s, so God knows how many people he fucked over in all the time he was there.